It's round 9 of the Candidates tournament played in Yekaterinburg in Siberia. And I'm looking at the game here between Anish Giri and Wang Hao. As ever, don't forget to like, comment and do subscribe. Hit that subscribe button for notifications of new videos, and do consider supporting us as well via PayPal or patreon.com. So here we go. Wang Hao yesterday drew his game very quickly against Ding Liren. He said he was still feeling the effects of jet lag. Anish Giri also drew with black. He played a solid Sveshnikov. Interesting, a new opening. And here we see him returning to pawn to d4. Very interesting that in his online tournaments that he was playing, he was going with e4 in a lot of the games. So he's been hiding his opening preparation. And he's back to what I would say is, maybe his more natural opening choice, playing d4 and quite classically. And indeed a Catalan. That's very much his style. Very responsible. Quite strategic, quite positional. And here we have, you could say, one of the main lines of the Catalan. So here you can play a closed variation with c6, knight d7, or you can give up that point on d5. So white recovers that pawn. And here Giri plays a4. So the basic idea of playing a6 is if queen takes pawn, then the pawn comes to b5, and then bishop b7, and black, having put the bishop on the long diagonal, plays knight d7 and goes for c5. That's the basic strategy. So with a4, what white is doing is just clamping down on this move b5. So this is about containment. This is very much Giri's style. And this whole variation with a4 has been extremely popular among the top players over the past few years. So the bishop finds its way onto the long diagonal. That's important to match that powerful bishop on g2. And bishop f4 from Giri. Well, this is not a big surprise. Giri has played this in several games against top players over the years. And of course the bishop is on an excellent square. So bishop d6. Okay, black is neutralizing that bishop on f4. And here previously, well, we've seen queen c1 from Giri. We've also seen bishop g5 in previous games. He's played those against Kramnik, against Aronian. But very quickly he played knight c3. Allowing his pawns to be doubled here. But because the pawns are together in this lovely central clump, that's not a problem for white at all. That central pawn mass is actually pretty strong, and you can see that it gives white extra control over that e5 square, and this is a very well-known theme. It also means, you'll notice the g file has opened, and sometimes white can use that. a5, a very standard move in these positions. So why is Wang Hao doing that? He's making room for that knight to come to the b4 square. You can see that black is a bit cramped here. So it's really important that black claims some space and claims that square, basically. So Wang Hao is fighting back. Knight a6, there we go. And knight e5, Giri playing these moves very, very quickly. And it's quite clear from this game and from his game yesterday that he has come to the tournament very well prepared. Exchange of bishops and pawn to c6. Black has this very solid setup of pawns. You can get this kind of structure from so many different openings. It's a little bit cramped, but it's very solid. There are no real weaknesses in black's position. Problem is black lacks space. Now here, what should white play? And Giri's next move, I think, is very, very interesting. It's clearly, because black is so solid here, it's not possible to go for a quick breakthrough. This is about incremental improvement of your position. You go in small steps, basically. So he played h3, and that's a move I really like, I have to say. It just gives the king the option sometimes just to move to h2, and that could be much more secure than putting the king back on h1, for example, in case at some moment there's a check on the long diagonal. But h3 is a really nice move, and also taking control of the g4 square as well could be important in some variations. I'm talking much, much later on in the game. You know, it'll stop a queen coming to g4. That little pawn move just means that white's king is just a bit safer. But it shows he's not in a hurry. Now clearly this was preparation. I like this move a lot. Queen b6. That looks fine. Queen comes out and connects these rooks. And looks at the pawn here. And Giri just retreats the queen. Okay, a very sound move. Protecting the pawn. And actually, well, the queen should move from c4, because sometimes black wants to break with c5 just to break down white's centre, fight back against this space advantage. And in that case, the queen does not belong on the c file. Also, potentially it makes room for this knight to come here. So queen e2, a good retreat, basically. And here, well, black always has a kind of dilemma in this sort of position. I know this very well myself from playing this position with, well, not only black, but with white as well. Should black break with c5, or do you wait? So knight b4 is possible here. Then, well, white could consider just nudging the king over, maybe playing rook g1, and perhaps getting a little bit of initiative here. That's an option. But knight b4 is a solid move. But maybe Wang was concerned that it would take a long time to actually get this break in once the rook comes to c1. Who knows? In any case, he went for c5 after 21 minutes thought. So this is obviously a move that has great consequences. You're breaking down white's centre. That's the good news. The bad news is that it gives away that b5 square. And also the centre is opening. Well, that knight is on a very good square on e5. So, well, let's see what happens. Giri thought here for 22 minutes. So clearly at this point he's very much out of his preparation. So he just took time to adjust. Good decision. Rook d1. Okay, looks very sensible. The centre is opening. d5 is opening. So he just brings that rook into the middle. Good move. Wang took. Giri recaptured, and then rook d8. And again, Giri thought for, well, almost half an hour over this next move. That is a big chunk of time. Because I mean, Giri is a very careful player. And in this kind of position, he appreciates that care is needed. He can see that he's very close to getting a pleasant advantage. So he's just looking at the different options to see which is the best way to squeeze something out of this position. So the options are, you can take here, you can play queen b5 straight away, or you can simply support the rook in the middle with rook d1. In fact, all of those moves are pretty decent. For example, queen b5 will force an exchange of queens. Now, white's pawn structure is not pretty, but you take that pawn. That's still not easy for black to equalise, actually, because the rook is so active. But white's pawns are not pleasant. I think rook d1 is a sensible move. But Giri exchanged on d8. It's an interesting idea. If rook takes, then queen b5, so he didn't want his pawns to be shattered. And this endgame is clearly good for white. And if the queen goes back, then he'd intended knight c4. And that pawn is vulnerable. Obviously still very complicated because black potentially has counterplay. But here we can see how that pawn could be very useful if there's a check at some point on this diagonal. And the king can maybe just hide on that square. Depends on the position. Anyway, that was an option for Wang to recapture with the rook. But he played queen takes. And now Giri is in control. I suspect this is the move that he didn't spend so long looking at, actually. This is less complicated for white. This is the kind of position that Giri likes a lot. Now, this is interesting. The queen comes to a8. And there's potential for a discovered check. And, yeah, instead of this king h2 move, which I've been saying is possible for the whole game, Giri actually put the king back on g1. I'm sure there's a subtle reason for this. But anyway, king g1 played. But in any case, this is a very pleasant position for white. You can see that it's all about piece activity. All white's pieces look good. And that knight on e5, looking at that potentially vulnerable point on f7, let's watch out for that. This is a constant theme in this game and is so typical of these kind of Catalan positions, actually, where white is now very much in control. And this is the kind of position that Giri absolutely loves, where he is squeezing away and his opponent has basically very little counterplay. The d file is closed. Giri switches to the c file. Very nice. The queen is tied down to defending those pawns. The rook has to keep an eye on the f7 pawn. What can black do? Not a lot. Although you could say that black's position is reasonably solid, still, I mean, this is a very worrying position for black to play. Knight f6 hits the queen. The queen just sticks around. Queen d6. And here, well, Wang Hao was already running very short of time, but his next move was certainly a mistake. He had to try this pretty ugly move and hope that this can be held, but it's certainly not pleasant. And then maybe b5 just to exchange pawns, but this is not an easy position at all. So instead he went g6. And this is a significant weakness. So that g6 pawn is vulnerable, and the knight as well. This just loosens black's position badly. He's trying to sort of get a solid position with king g7, but this really doesn't help. And we'll see some variations in a second where, well, Giri manages to exploit this. As I said, Wang Hao already running short of time, and I think Giri's play at this point was very clever indeed. He didn't rush it. He didn't rush in. He just made sure everything was protected first. b3. No accidents. Let the guy sweat in his own juice. It's a very good strategy when your opponent is short of time. Don't play forcing moves. That makes it easy for your opponent. Play little moves that just improve your position a bit. And very often you'll find your opponent just cracks of their own accord. h5. Well, that's understandable because it takes away that square from potentially this knight. King h2. Well, there you go. The king got there in the end. But it's just saying to black, okay, your move. You haven't got a good move in this position. You know, for example, if the rook comes to attack the queen, queen e7, and actually it's game over straight away. King g7. Okay, the king steps up, but Queen d4. Not so pleasant on that long diagonal. So knight d7 now a threat. So rook d8. And Giri just brought the queen back to b2. This is so unpleasant for black. It really is. Queen b8. And here's a very interesting moment where Giri finds a very nice idea to actually break through to Wang's position. And very hard to counter. My computer tells me that Queen c3 is a good move here. So first thing, take some control of the file. Queen a8, Queen c7, hits this pawn that gets protected. And now a beautiful move for white, a beautiful winning move. Maybe you've spotted it. And this justifies this idea of h3 and king h2. Rook g1. That's a wonderful winning move. Threatening rook g6 check, of course, the pawn is pinned. And there is no decent way out for black. That would have been the icing on the cake of white's strategy. But, well, I'm not saying that's an easy continuation to find at all, but I find it really, really beautiful. A computer variation, of course. But I do like the logic of it. But I have to say, I really like Giri's plan as well, b4. There is a flaw to this, but, well, in a classical game where you're short of time, impossible to find. There's an extraordinary defense, but let me show you. So what's the idea of this? Well, this was taken, and then rook c4. So it's a way of bringing this rook into the game. So simply rook takes b4 happening, and then the rook will get to the 7th rank, and then f7 falls. That's the idea. And, well, finding a defense against this is impossible. Wang played b3, but watch this. The computer points out an unbelievable defense. Now, I should repeat, I'm not saying that, Wang should have found this one. I'm showing it because it's really amazing and beautiful. And I repeat, impossible for any sentient human being to find. So rook d1. Okay, what's the idea? Rook takes. Looks fantastic for white. This looks like just a hit and hope move. After this move, rook b7, looks like white is completely winning, breaking through. But watch this. Queen d5. Rook takes pawn check. King h6. Rook takes knight. Okay, this looks completely crazy. White is a piece up and about to checkmate. But watch what black can do. Check. Now, if rook g1, the king just comes to h4. It's winning for white. But watch. Rook takes. I'll tell you what, black needs something big here. King here. Now, if queen g1 check, king f3 and the king escapes. But remarkably, h4 check. The king steps up. And now this is a draw by perpetual check, even though black is a rook and knight down. As I said, impossible to spot that such a kind of desperate lunge like rook d1 is going to lead to a draw. Wang played b3. As I said, he was down to his final minute. Rook b4. And now the game resumes its rightful course, I should say. So rook takes b3. So breaking through to b7. And this is completely winning. Of course, if the rook defends, then knight d7 and a catastrophe on the long diagonal. So queen e8. So basically Wang is hoping that Giri will take on f7. Then he might have a few chances to hold that end game of rook and knight against queen. Actually, I'm pretty sure this is winning for white as well. I think there'll be a chance to crawl in, with these kind of moves, and e4, king g5. But in any case, white does not need to chance that, of course. Rook a7, very nice move. Let him sweat, but also there's kind of a threat of playing queen b7 as well, and there's no good move. If rook b8, queen c2, threatening queen g6, once again exploiting that pin, and queen c7. Really elegant winning move, queen c2, which I'm sure Giri, of course, had foreseen. So rook a7 just played. Rook d5 and queen b7 breaking through on the 7th. There you go. That knight doing its job. Knight e4, and for the final move, knight takes f7. And here Wang Hao resigned. Of course, there is absolutely no defense to a discovered check, and, well, it's going to be mate shortly on the king side. A very impressive victory from Anish Giri, and I think it really shows that he's carried his excellent form from the last few months into this tournament. He looks good, he's prepared well, he's playing extremely well, and he's now just half a point behind the leader, Yan Nishi. So the tournament is absolutely wide open. More coming for you tomorrow. Thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. Let's try and reach 100k. Thanks for watching.